My father, Haviv Shimoni, died on July 13, 1994. He was 61 years old. His death unleashed my primal cry as I said Shalom Abba for the very last time. In the weeks that followed his unexpected death, I was lost in memories, and looking at photos, it all came back. Haviv, meaning the beloved one, was admired by all who knew him. He was a charismatic man with a sharp mind and fearless personality. He fought for the poor and the voiceless and confronted head-on the ethnic inequality that prevailed in Israel between European Jews and those who came from Middle Eastern countries. He was respected because he believed in something bigger than himself, in equality and justice. His vision was of Israeli society where cultural diversity would be prized and Jews of all backgrounds would share equal opportunity to pursue their dreams. From a young age, he belonged to a group of men at the center stage of the development of the State of Israel. In old photos, I see him with David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister, with Moshe Dayan, Shimon Peres, or speaking with Teddy Kollek, the mayor of Jerusalem. In one photo, Yitzhak Rabin is listening intently as my father whispers in his ear. While these men became known for focusing on Israel's external threats, my father focused on the country's cultural and ethnic biases and challenged the European-dominated establishment. His drive was rooted in his ethnic pride and family history. My grandparents immigrated to Israel from Kurdistan. Yitzhak ben Tzvi, Israel's second president, described the Kurdish Jews as the lost tribe of Israel from the time of the first exile to Babylon. For centuries, they lived in isolated villages in the mountains of northern Iraq, living in harmony with their Muslim and Christian neighbors. They spoke Aramaic and until the early 1900s had little contact with the outside world. My grandfather, Chacham Shalom Shimoni, was born in Dahok in 1884. He was a rabbi and the spiritual leader of the community. He also had political influence with the governing authorities, who often came to consult with him. In 1933, upon the birth of my father, he had a stunning vision, the rebirth of the Jewish nation in the Holy Land. After thousands of years of exile, the time has finally come to return home. In 1936, he led the first wave of immigration. They settled in Jerusalem and prepared for others to arrive. By 1956, the entire community, about 120,000 people, settled in Israel. Yet despite the common history that goes back more than 5,000 years, Israel in its inception was a country torn by deep cultural and economic gap. There was one Israel, Ashkenazim, the Jews who came from Europe, who were relatively affluent, educated, and in control of the political institutions. And there was another Israel, the Mizrahim, Jews who immigrated from Middle Eastern countries, poor, unskilled, religious, and although they were a majority, were socially and politically underrepresented. So although he came with a grand vision, the reality which my grandfather found himself was not totally romantic. The family of 8 lived in a 2-room apartment and had to cope with tough realities. Yet despite his challenges and only the shadow of the status that he had in Kurdistan, my grandfather remained optimistic, devoting his energies to improve the living conditions for his people. He was known for his devotion to community, modesty, love for Israel. After his death at the age of 94, the street he lived on was named after him. In 1946, at the age of 13, realizing that Israel would not be brought on a silver platter, my father joined the hardline underground movement, Lehi, Fighters for the Freedom of Israel. They defended against Arab attacks against civilian Jews and fought to expel the British authorities from the country. One night, while he was hanging anti-British posters around the center of Jerusalem, he was caught by the Brits and was put in prison. While in prison, he wrote about social and philosophical issues, developing the ideology which was to guide him throughout his life. A year later, he was smuggled out by the help of Yitzhak Shamir, who later became the prime minister. My parents met in 1948 when one evening my mother attended a political meeting where my father was the speaker. As she tells it, it was love at first sight. She was inspired by his passion and eloquence. They got married in 1952, and her admiration and devotion to him lasted for 40 years of marriage. After the establishment of Israel in 1948 and his service in the IDF, my father studied Middle Eastern history, political science, and public administration at the Hebrew University. In 1951, he joined Mapai, the center-left political party led by David Ben-Gurion. As the representative of the poor neighborhoods, he fought for progressive reforms, for minimum income, better housing and education, improved health care and social services. All along, he encouraged his Kurdish community to integrate into society, to uplift themselves, to avoid becoming a social burden, while still preserving their cultural heritage. Within the party, he organized the Academic Society for Oriental Jews, and despite the objections of Golda Meir, it was a great success. In the 60s and early 70s, he served on the Jerusalem City Council and worked as a director for the Center of Product Design and Packaging Institute, where he worked diligently to put Israel on the international stage. Our one-bedroom apartment in the center of Jerusalem was always filled with excitement. Men and women of all ages and walks of life would drop by daily and engage in fiery political discussions into the small hour of the night. It was thrilling. This was a time of great optimism, filled with hope for a glorious future. Things hit close to home in 1968, where upon my graduation from the district elementary school, which drew kids from the neighborhoods, I enrolled at the Hebrew Gymnasia, the most prestigious high school for Ashkenazi kids in the affluent part of the city. I was one of the first from our neighborhood to cross the social border. For my father, this was a proud moment. But for me, overnight, I entered a nightmarish reality of prejudice. From the start, I was ridiculed and rejected. The kids bullied me, calling me a Kurdi, implying stupidity. The teachers took special satisfaction in humiliating me in front of the class, which only added fuel to the classmates' meanness. Not surprisingly, their insults affected me deeply, and I became depressed and sick, often missing weeks of school, and at the end of the year had to repeat the grade. Yet, believing in my ability to excel, my father petitioned the school to allow me to continue at the proper grade, but they flatly refused. Immediately, he sprung into full action. My crisis brought home not only my severity of my situation, but the depth of the ethnic problem which created it. Gone were any illusions that cultural bigotry would dissolve naturally. He began an aggressive campaign for school integration. His mission was to change the social composition of schools with busing and redefining social districts, and to improve the access to higher education to the underprivileged populations. He spoke and wrote passionately about social discrimination. He said, "If we are to truly have a democratic society in Israel, in which Jews of all countries can live with their heads held high, it is essential that we start educating our kids when they're still young and not have been colored by hatred. Education is not a matter of learning the disciplines, but disciplining human nature. We must teach decency and tolerance. We must ask ourselves if we wish to have one nation or nurture racism. Cultural and racial segregation in Israel is a subject that can no longer be ignored. It was an uphill battle confronted with resistance and opposition, but my father did not give up. He involved every sector of society to look for new constructive solutions. There was no turning back. After years of separation, the Hebrew Gymnasia and other schools finally opened their doors to students from different backgrounds. In 1974, my father was elected to the Knesset, where he continued his fight for social equality. He submitted over 300 queries and legislative proposals and worked tirelessly to build a solid foundation to stamp out social bias through nonviolent means. He was instrumental in establishing the Center for Integration of Eastern Jewish Heritage in the Ministry of Education. In the 80s, he served as the director of Tax Bureau in Jerusalem and continued to be a driving force for social causes until his death. His proudest accomplishment was creating the National Association of Kurdish Jews in Israel. The organization's mission is to preserve the cultural heritage of Kurdish Jews. He compiled 6 books about their history and folklore and organized the Saharane, the yearly festival when the community spends days singing and dancing and sharing traditional delicacies. The Kurdish community has become a respected part of Israeli society and has achieved great success in all sectors. As I look back at my childhood, worlds away from where I'm now, it seems like a dream suspended in time. With the years, I have come to appreciate the influence that my father had on my life. I was privileged to learn from him about genuine compassion and determination, about commitment and dedication to family and community. He taught me that individual actions and effort count, that vision leads to creativity and life. In one of his letters, he wrote, "I would like you to know that I always pursued the truth and despised deception and dishonesty. Because of this approach, I may have lost many opportunities in my life, but I'm not sorry. Indeed, I'm happy with my lot because I feel that my life is an expression of my inner expectations. Without integrity and self-respect, one can sink into victimhood, and it is difficult to get out of this downward spiral. There is nothing worse than that. Try to always run away from hypocrisy, to thrive, to always do your best. Be proud of who you are and where you came from. The day will come when you will comprehend the depths of my words and pass them on to your children." My father died on the 5th day of the month of Av. For 9 days during that month, Jews mourn the destruction of the temples with the hope of the coming of the Messiah. The literal meaning of the day is God consoles Father. My father had so much more to still contribute, but on that day God soothed him and he also comforted us. The mantra for the day, Bakesh Shalom Viratfeu, do good and pursue peace, was the motto of my father's life. And so his death, too, will forever be associated with the most promising day of Jewish tradition. In his own way, he brought us closer to the time when sorrow will turn into joy, mourning to celebration, darkness into light and song. My father's headstone is a rough boulder found in a field in Jerusalem. The words engraved on it is a poem he wrote while in the British prison. They reflect the hope that brought my grandfather back from exile to Jerusalem and the passion that carried my father throughout his life. ומרחבים ירוקים פרוסים מפה ומעל, ותמיהת החיים עוד תפעם בלב לבאות. And wide green expanses are sweeping here and up above, and the wonderment of life will continue to beat in the heart forever. Haviv Shimoni lived his life with intention and purpose, with devotion and enthusiasm, above all with honesty and immense courage. He prepared me to encounter the harshness of life, forever cloaking me with an innocent vision of a happier world. May his memory be blessed.